The mission of Moms for Liberty is to unify, educate, and empower parents to defend their parental rights at all levels of government. Once a parent loses the right to direct the upbringing of their child, we've lost everything. Now, very fascinating. We've invited today, the invitation went out over a month ago, to Amy and to Dave to present for us about practical measures about how to stand for truth. And it just so happens that Amy is the Grand Traverse County Chair for Moms for Liberty. Well, after I talked with Dave and Amy, about 2 weeks later, this is in the Wall Street Journal, there's this huge article that talks about we will not let co-parent with the government, whatever it was. It was all about the need for parents and grandparents to be very intentionally involved in the education of their children. And so it is a joy today to kind of go from maybe the state level that you just heard, now down to the local level of what does it look like to practically be involved and stand for truth. And what a fascinating conversation we're about to have with Dave and Amy Collins. Would you welcome Dave and Amy? Come on over, guys.
So Pastor Craig told us there would only be 15 people here. So I think 300 of you need to go, and we need 15 people that are only going to pay attention for 13 minutes.
I think there's still donuts. Oops.
Is that on?
There we go.
Yeah.
I think there's still donuts out there.
Okay, yeah, so we were asked to come up here and talk about truth. Truth involves discussing some very decisive issues within society, even within the church. Hopefully I can articulate what we've learned over the last couple of years. There's a lot of things that Christians are facing. I think Mr. DeMoose kind of highlighted a few of them, but at the local level with our children, there's a lot more that is coming at us, especially for our kids. And Pastor Dave yesterday talked about how kids form their worldview by the age of 13, and I think this is a critical thing to talk about with the church because we are going to lose our children. Hopefully I can give you some practical examples of how you can step in and engage with the culture. I can't say I've done everything right all the time, but I can say I've tried. We're going to take you through our journey and stop and explain a few things along the way. Our journey has been layered. It has changed our lives in lots of ways too. Doors have opened, doors have closed. We've had experiences we never would have dreamt we would have gone through just even a few years ago. I hope that if you disagree with anything I say, you can give me some grace and just know that it's brought me closer to God and just rejoice in that part of it. So where do we start? We start in March of 2020. Who remembers that? COVID, right? Yeah. Kind of shook everybody's world. So before COVID, I was a mom, busy. I worked. I did everything I could to, keep the kids going, the family going. We did sports, we did music lessons, we were driving all over the place. I was trying to raise my kids. I was taking them to church. We were doing everything at church that we were supposed to do. We were hosting community group at our house every week. Life was just ticking along. But what we didn't realize, we were very complacent. We were lukewarm people. We were going through the motions. We were very unaware of what we were about to experience. COVID hits, first reaction, okay, cool, a break. We really needed a break. Life could slow down for a bit. It was awesome. And we're introverts by nature, so we were cool with staying home for a bit. We followed the rules. We were enjoying time with our kids. Everything was virtual. He's an educator. I work in healthcare. He was home. The kids were home. I was still going to work. I worked through COVID, but just at a less frequent pace. School was virtual. Church was virtual. Our small group was virtual. Getting where I'm going, everything was virtual. It was online. It kind of started wearing me out a little bit. The kids were starting to feel it a little bit. We were seeing a little bit of sluggishness in our children, and I said, no, we're not going to survive. We're going to thrive. We're going to get through this. Well, 2 weeks turns to 4 weeks, turns to 6 weeks, and I started getting restless. I think a lot of people were getting restless, and I began to ask a lot of questions. I was questioning God, to be honest with you. So it wasn't just the government I was questioning. I was saying, God, what the heck is going on here? Why have we shut down society? Why are we withholding health care? Why are people dying alone? Why are the clergy not allowed in the hospital? Why are the kids not in school? Why is the church not meeting? Why are our children being kept from activities? How are the kids learning? What are the kids learning? Those were all questions rolling through my head. So after getting restless, after hearing a lot of doom and gloom, I finally said, I'm done. Turned off the news, turned off the cable, stopped listening to healthcare COVID updates because I was tired of hearing about how I was gonna die. And I said, the minute we find a church that's open, we're going. So New Hope, enters New Hope. They open June of 2020. But first we had some chaos.
So if COVID was not enough, there was more. Riots, protests, cities were burning down. They were tearing down statues of Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, even Frederick Douglass. America, we've heard, was systemically racist. And there was virtual singing all over. We couldn't get away from it. We'd watch the sports games, it was there. We'd go on the internet and there was banners. I went to Myers and it's all over the banners in the store. It's all over the PAs. There was a little section for it. Entertainment, like with Disney, started to change. Black Lives Matter and pride flags were all over, even on our churches. The American church was divided between virtual and in person, masks or no masks, and how do we address these social issues? So there was a lot of confusion between Amy and I when we just had to wrestle through it all. We had to learn, we had to listen, and we had to figure it out.
So we come to church, we come to New Hope. The first sermon was Psalm 23. So Pastor Craig told us, don't fear. We were walking through the valley. Goodness and mercy were following right behind us. The next week I came. What were we told? Psalm 121, where does my help come from? At that moment I realized I wasn't lifting my eyes up to the mountains. I had a heart that was way too empty. I lacked a ton of contentment, and that I was going through a lot of emotions and living in fear of what all this chaos was going to bring. I kept wanting to come back to church, which was a first for me in a really long time, because with 3 kids and a job, you just get busy and you just do what you have to do. But I was praying the whole time that God would not shut church back down. I kept saying to him, just keep the doors open. And that's when I realized that my whole thing, we're not just going to survive, we're going to thrive. When I said that to my kids, it was for me. That was part of my unawareness. But how do you keep going in that? How did you keep going that? People weren't meeting. I couldn't ask somebody to meet with me, help me navigate through this. I knew people that didn't feel it was right to me. I wasn't going to ask them to go against their convictions. So church, coming to church, that was all I had. So summer came, summer went. School was not in session yet. I was getting exhausted, thought my kids needed to be in school. I had never listened to a school board meeting up until that fall. So I didn't even know who the school board members were. I'd only previously interested myself in what was going on in my children's classrooms. I never got interested in any involvement at the district level. I had barely even interacted with my kids' principals at their schools prior to this. I said, but my kids were at home and they were expressing their desire to be in school, so I had to do something because they were getting to a point where they were not going to thrive. I'm not a political person. I'm actually quite private and introverted, so what do I even say? I had the tendency to be the person who would go along to get along. I would say, you do you, that's cool, and I'll do me, and we'll both just be good. I started researching data from other countries like Sweden, whose kids were going to school. I was reading educational journals to gain insight into this online learning thing and how kids were doing. The data started concerning me. I started asking the school board, how can we continue to stay home? I sent multiple emails with what I'd been learning. Then I learned about a letter that was circulating among healthcare providers petitioning the school to remain remote. Was I going to sign it because everybody else was? No, I wasn't. So how do I go against all those other medical professionals? There were many, hundreds of them that signed that letter. You do it for your kids, right? So that's when we started learning some other stuff. We continued to pay attention to school board meetings.
And so we started hearing stories from around the nation, just alarming stories of what was being taught in our schools. And we thought, well, that's Chicago, that's California, it's like, we're in Traverse City, we're a small town, it's not gonna be here. Well, we watched the board meeting, and we started to hear the words DEIB, social justice, systemic racism, and we had to figure it out. And if you could go to the first slide. Someone who was helpful in us understanding this from a Christian perspective was Voddie Baucham, and he wrote a book, Fault Lines. And so he summarizes it good in this first part where he talks about what is critical theory. And just look at the first highlight. And this is in the social science's own words. So critical is geared towards identifying and exposing problems in order to facilitate revolutionary political change. So this is not about reform, this is about revolution. And they do that by problematizing it. They do it by amplifying. You can make anything look bad. You can make something good look bad if you keep hounding on what's bad about it. So that's their strategy. It's a thing that denies truth. And it's also a theory, going down to the bottom. It's a set of ideas, modes of thoughts, ethics, and methods. So it's more than just a theory. It's thought and activism. And he goes on to say at the bottom, critical theory is not just an analytical tool, as some have suggested. It is a philosophy, and it's a worldview. And so Neil Shenvi was another person who was...
Hey, Tom, can you do the next slide,
next
please?
slide. Neil Shenvi was another person who helped us from a Christian perspective, and this is from shenviapologetics.com. And this is just an excellent illustration. So we have critical theory, and so these are the terms that go with it, like cisgender, privilege, intersectionality, white privilege, social justice. When you hear critical race theory, it's part of critical theory. When you hear about feminism and gender studies, it's critical theory. Queer theory is critical theory. All right, and next slide. And then in the Gospel Coalition in 2019, there was an article by Neil Shenvi and Pat Sowery, and it was called about the incompatibility of critical theory and Christianity. And I thought it was an excellent summary. Critical theorists classify racism, sexism, capitalism, heteronormativity, cisgender privilege, and Christian privilege as a form of oppression. In all these cases, a dominant group has imposed its values on a subordinate group. And in all these cases, the solution is to dismantle the norms that keep the minoritized group in bondage. So did you hear that? Let's read that again. The solution is to dismantle. This is about revolution. So Christians who embrace this paradigm of critical theory as a solution to racism or sexism often question a biblical understanding of gender roles, gender identity, sexual orientation, marriage, parental authority, and even the uniqueness of the Christian faith. So there's two worldviews going on here, and they're hostile to each other.
And please note, Christian privilege is one of the forms of oppression.
So the next slide, this is from our local school district. This is a training from our local school district. And on the left-hand side, you have the privileged social identity groups. And so you go white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, wealthy, non-disabled, and then we get to the Christian. And so in the middle column, you see the system of oppression. So the system of oppression that Christians bring to this world is Christian dominance. And what do you think Christian dominance is? It is Judeo-Christian values. It's the ideas of marriage and gender and life, all Christian values. Just some quotes. The state, this is from Daryl Harrison and Just Thinking podcast. The state, they have their evangelists too, and they are making converts through public education. And then going back to Erwin Lutzer again in his book, No Reason to Hide, be warned, America is no longer the country some of us remember it to be. A cultural tsunami has arrived, and there is no safe ground.
So as we kept going through life, school opened, school closed, school opened. And I had a few pivotal moments. One was learning my daughter was sitting outside in 40-degree weather eating her lunch because she was afraid to go in the cafeteria. Another was my daughter being afraid because a teammate of hers had gotten COVID and she was hysterical about getting exposed. To the point I had to go to the school during the day and take her a COVID test. And we sat in the car and had this conversation about this irrational fear is not thriving, and we need to do something about this. I also had a teacher that I had become, good, I shouldn't say good friends, but we had a good relationship. And she started telling me about things at the elementary level that she was seeing. So the hallway being filled with pride art that the children were making. The constant conversation by a few teachers that held progressive views in what they were talking with the kids about and pushing for these things to be infused within the elementary school. I also started seeing my son was getting taught social emotional learning. I didn't quite understand what that was. I decided at that point I should probably remain committed to paying attention to what was going on in the school mostly because I was afraid things would shut down, but also because I was starting to see these little things sneak in, like what the heck is going on? I was afraid of this irrational fear is what I really was afraid of. I wasn't sure about this social emotional learning, and I just needed to stay informed. I needed to thrive. So we started noticing within our kids, we were having to have some discussions with them about some ideology taught at school. There were some assignments that we had really questioned. One of our kids started questioning life. One of our kids started questioning Christian privilege and Christian oppression. It really got to be a little bit more than what we thought was going on. Is that you?
It ended up being worse than we thought. There was one point we watched a board meeting, and there was a lone woman who stood up in the face of all sorts of opposition. And Amy and I she reached out through social media, found out who she was, and we connected with her. And then we formed a group of parents, concerned parents, and we started requesting information through the Freedom of Information Act from our schools. And our district had put together a social equity task force that was reporting and directing to the board. And there were all sorts of social justice trainings.
I think I'll say, too, part of all this is what I learned had led to the social emotional learning. And what I found about social emotional learning was a little concerning. And when you hear the statement of the truth can be stranger than fiction sometimes, it's really the case here. I started digging into it. I found out there's a group called the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, which forms the basis for a lot of these programs. They have foundational roots in the Fetzer Institute. The Fetzer Institute's stated mission is to build a spiritual foundation for a loving world. I started asking, are we teaching a religion? As I looked into this Fetzer Institute, it was founded by a guy named John Fetzer. He did have some Christian roots, but according to the website, throughout his lifetime, he explored and embraced the wisdom of many other great traditions. I said, what the heck does that mean? I found he was influenced by a lady named Alice Bailey, who was an occultist. His pursuit was occultism and New Age spiritualism. The framework for SEL has 5 learning competencies at the center, and all else orbits around it. They seem innocuous. You have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So that sounds all cool. We've got this grid, this, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, a diagram. The students at the center of the learning. The first layer of success is not the family, it's the classroom. The second layer is the school. You have the student, the classroom, the school. Then finally you have your family on the outskirts of that whole grid. The narrative starts by talking about relationships and partnerships with families, but the focus is to get the families to buy into the social emotional development, and they refer to the family's child as their student. This is no longer your child. This is the student. The fundamentals of SEL, they envision all children as self-aware, caring, responsible, engaged, and lifelong learners who work together to achieve their goals and create a more inclusive, just, and equitable world. They do this by developing healthy identities, I don't know in what way, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. We can probably all agree that might be a good thing, but when you dig into the roots of the program and look at the whole mysticism and the New Age, and here's where it gets really crazy. This Alice Bailey formed a publishing company called the Lucifer Publishing Company, which later got renamed to Lucas Trust, and their current day connection is to the UN, and they all have an underlying theme of what Alice Bailey described as, quote, right human relations, quote, transforming human consciousness for world goodwill. It seemed as if this was the secular response to the Bible. The program becomes what morals the school needs to teach based on what government standards are produced with no regard to family values. It becomes about the community and not the individual. The family is removed from the center of the framework, and it's only about collaborating when schools feel it's necessary. So I wrestle with, okay, we're teaching proper behavior, kindness, respect, empathy, so what? Doesn't Micah 6:8 tell us that? We should act justly, do what's right, and live humbly. So I asked TCAPS if I can look at the program. They arranged for me to come to the admin building, review the program. I sat there for a couple hours, looked through the lessons. There was nothing overtly scandalous. What I did notice, though, is there is an open-ended nature of all these lessons. This could evolve into conversation about gender identity. Lessons on empathy aren't particularly guided to allow for discourse of contradictory views. Instead of feeling like the kids would be guided to talk about how we differ and differences are good, it seemed more geared to talk about how we should accommodate. Accommodate what? Certain views, certain lifestyles? How does this guide us? When I asked these questions, I was told the teaching staff will stick to the lessons. And when I asked which will be teaching the lessons, they just said support staff or social workers. So, you want to keep going there? Yeah. Yeah. So we started digging more. We submitted information through the Freedom of Information Act. It's when we found out about this Justice Leaders Collaborative, which Dave had up there. We learned about trainings from the Michigan Department of Education. There was money spent on equity consultants. They spent tens of thousands of dollars to collaborate with these companies. We saw communication about suggesting honors classes were promoting segregation. We saw a discussion about myths and facts based on gender identity. And this was all a few years ago. This isn't recent stuff. So we had seen words such as whiteness, white privilege, systemic racism, America is systemic racist, microaggressions, oppressors, implicit bias, gender identity and sexuality, and a lot of stuff regarding sports and whether or not males and females can flow between the two genders.
So this social equity task force that we found out, they wanted to audit the curriculum through a lens of equity. So they were going to infuse the social justice into the curriculum, K through 12. This was not only about race. Again, it was about gender, and sexuality was also included. They wanted to create awareness of social justice terms. So this is what the district wanted. They wanted to diversify libraries, and we didn't think it was a bad thing at first. But then we found out that they wanted to affirm their social justice through the libraries, and Amy's going to talk about some of that later on. They wanted to create a board resolution that would affirm social justice, their stance and direction. And this would be our battle in 2021. The summer of 2021 was our big battle with the board.
That was when we first started speaking at board meetings. Dave met with the superintendent, talked to board members.
Yeah, this was just our group effort of this little parent group we had. We were emailing, we were talking to them on the phone, we met with the superintendents. We were just trying to get more information and clarity.
I started asking, is this where school is going? Is this idea that puts my kids into a category of privilege or an oppressor based on their skin color, their religion, their gender, their sexual orientation? Do I want my kids to learn that they are who the world says they are and not who God made them to be? Especially my son, who is white, male, Christian, cisgendered, able-bodied, heterosexual, able-minded. He was every form of oppressive intersection. We felt like we were on a fast train headed for a collision, and we were walking backwards on it. And we felt like we just had to jump off. So we took the leap. We decided to take our youngest out of public school. He was going from elementary to middle school at the time. That provoked my daughter to turn into his advocate and his attorney and tell us we were being the worst parents in the world, and she was fighting for all the injustice that we were imposing on him. After a few days of the torture from her, she looked at us one day and said, well, if he's going, can I go too? And we were like, wait, what? Like, you want to leave your school? You're going into 10th grade. And she said yes. So I asked her reasons, and she said, well, my friends are making a lot of bad choices. I don't feel I have teachers that are going to support me to make the right choices, and if I go to a Christian school, I feel I would have more of that support from my teachers. So we talked about how kids are kids. You're going to get good kids, bad kids anywhere you go. Not necessarily going to be change as far as kids go, but yes, you might have more support. So she left, he left, our oldest stayed at TCAP. She had one more year to go. But I'll tell you that transition wasn't easy. My son cried every day for a year getting on the school bus when we changed to school. It made me question if I made the right choice, and I just kept saying, don't doubt in the dark what God has shown in the light. And I kept reciting Psalm 23, and I knew goodness and mercy were going to follow me along the way.
So this board meeting, so there were several board meetings on this resolution, the DEIB resolution. They were heated and energetic. This was a hot button issue. one of my clips, Amy and I both spoke, and one of my clips made the news, and like in the morning when I woke up, I saw it. I'm like, what am I doing on the news? I don't want this attention. I hate being in front of cameras. And then right after what I had spoke, one of the board members says, this is not happening in our school. And so we obtained information. We obtained it through FOIAs that showed that the district was doing what they were denying. We were loved by some and hated by others. We both probably at work received people who said, nice job, and we wanted them along the fight, but they just quietly went on. We were called racist and liars and homophobes.
And my favorite was European.
Yeah. And both sides invoked the name of God. It was just like a very, very crazy time, a very hot issue time. And then the news came. So Amy and a group of mothers were featured in the Washington Post. They were interviewed. The Ticker and the Record Eagle, they were running articles too, and they weren't complimentary to our position. WTCM always had something about this issue on their news too. So with the FOIA information, we thought that if we presented it to the community, like if we put out a website and put, this is what, all these papers, I mean, there was hundreds of papers and they were organized. If we just put that into the community, they would surely see it and rise up and fight against this. But that's not what happened. So the website that we had, it got featured in the Ticker and the Washington Post. And so we were at Disneyland, or Disney World when this happened, and I started receiving all sorts of messages from my phone. And I clicked on the message, and there was all sorts of hate mail. Like, we hate your family, get out of Traverse City, a lot of F-bombs, a lot of not so nice things, which was just shocking at the happiest place on earth. So the board resolution passed, and some revisions were taken out. They took out some of the extreme language, but the board wanted to just move it along. They were tired of it. These meetings were lasting late into the night. At this final resolution battle, there was teacher unions, advocacy groups, and they showed up in a large number, and our numbers were much smaller.
Yeah, so like I said, we pulled our two out of public school. Our oldest daughter stayed. She graduated in 2022. When she was there, I stayed vigilant to what was going on in the classroom. There were many things simmering. I just hoped we could get her out, brush the dust off, and move on with life.
So Amy and I had two different responses after this resolution. Mine was, we had brought this all to your attention. You guys, you've seen what it is, and you don't care. So there, have it. So kind of like a Romans 1 or a shake the dust off your feet when Jesus told to his disciples. And I don't know, I still wrestle with that. But I felt like I had to water what was growing, and that was my faith, my family, and my church, like serving youth and Kids Zone Connected. And I don't think that I'm done. Like, I haven't quit the battle. We talk about this a lot. I'm just being watchful. And Amy, she had a different response, though. And I'd have to say, like, our kids hate when we're talking about this all day. We're talking about sermons we hear. We talk about, like, what's in the news. We talk about articles we read. Like, they're like, oh, do we have to hear about this again? And so this is Amy. Like, when we talk about this stuff, she's typing. And, like, before I know it, like, I'm just processing it. And she's already filed emails out to board members. And so she's a little bulldog. And so she's taken a different approach, and she'll share her approach.
Yeah, so that's what prompted me. I started looking. There's many groups advocating for education. I ultimately decided to go with Moms for Liberty, mostly because they had a verse, Esther 4:14. We're here for such a time as this. God just really gave me an unsettled feeling. I mean, my kids were out, but there's a lot of kids still at the school, and they are my kids' friends, and those are influences on my kids. I couldn't ignore it. So what started as the push for race, became just this whole web that we just learned was all about critical theory, which birthed the intersectionality, which gave rise to the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can't embrace the race part without knowing where it leads to the attacks on Christian beliefs. So we're now dealing with boys and girls' private spaces. We have posters. I think, Tom, we have a picture of the poster. We have posters that are circulating in the elementary school about gender identity, and sexuality. There's name tag placards put out by the NEA. I think there's a picture of that, Tom, yeah. There's that QR code on the back that provides kids to access a website. Part of the website gives kids, there's some pretty perverse sexual material on there. There's how-to manuals, there's porn literacy. If you go to the next slide, Tom, there's one of the links. And then if you go one more, Teen Health Source. And if you notice in the upper left corner, I've got it circled there, quick hide button. Kids perusing on this website, they can click that and it goes right to YouTube. This is all put out by the National Education Association. We had state-sponsored professional development for educators that we had FOIA'd that explicitly teaches educators on how to conceal student identity from parents, so meaning their gender identity. Christopher Rufo did a good investigative article about this concerning the Michigan Department of Education. Books in libraries with sexually explicit images and graphics, written portrayals and pictures of sex and rape. We had challenged a couple of those books in the school, and it was kind of telling just where we were at. So we were told that these either met their social emotional learning standards or they needed to stay there because College Board may be asking students questions on the AP Lit exam regarding one of the books. We have New Age religion being taught in the form of social emotional learning. We have a sex ed curriculum that is incrementally removing gender from the material. I was reviewing the sex ed curriculum this week, and it actually says, birth control methods for people who, how is it worded? People who identify, people taking estrogen, and birth control techniques for people who take testosterone. So we're removing the whole male and female. We have health services that are offered to students without parental consent. We have Title IX laws that are protecting gender identity, and the school is hiring staff to coordinate with these accommodations. So I've brought up many concerns with the school. I've brought up the fact that boys were in girls' bathrooms. That was one of my daughter's reasons for wanting to leave. The superintendent told me I was a liar and it didn't exist. When I asked about concerns about professional development teachers were attending, I was told they don't have control over what their staff does. When I asked about the posters being distributed, I was told they weren't, when in fact we knew they were. We had a teacher reporting it to us. When I asked about the NEA badge, I was told they weren't being used, which again, we knew they were because we had a teacher report it to us and show us a basket that was sitting in an elementary school. When I challenged the graphic nature of books, I just told you that, I was told they met standards. I've applied for the Sex Ed Advisory Board twice, and I've been turned down twice. I've applied for a book review committee, I've been turned down. There was a vacant spot on the school board, and I applied for that. I didn't get selected for that either. There was a big shock, right? So I don't have a whole lot of successes that I can report to you. I'm pushing back, but I can say that I can only hope that I am trying to put light on the dark that's in the world. So we've had a lot of degradation of society. We've had the Bible removed from school. We've had prayer removed from school. Creation is no longer taught. The 10 Commandments have been removed. Christmas break turns to winter break. Easter becomes incorporated with spring break. The words under God are sometimes not recited. In the pledge, parental authority and family structure is being denigrated. Gender is being transformed, and sex is being perverted even at the elementary level. So each generation, I've realized, has removed, another root of biblical foundation from our education, while us, the church, sit back and does nothing. We're told and asked, is this really that pervasive? And I guess my question would be, does it need to be pervasive to take action? I don't think so. I think we need to cut the roots off as they are forming. It almost felt like to me that we were dealing with the snake in the garden and hissing at us and saying, did God really say? Which was really eye-opening for me. So I started the Moms for Liberty, hoping to put light on the evil prowling in the classrooms. It's challenged me to read some books, literature that I wish I had never read. I've been sharing with others through social media platforms. I've gone on WTCM with Ron Jolly a couple times, explaining the role of books in the library. And Moms for Liberty got tagged as a hate group, of course, so I went on there and talked about that. My hope is that this knowledge that parents and grandparents and community can just be aware. It puts me out of my comfort zone, for sure, but there's been a lot of people in history and through the Bible that have been out of their comfort zone and doing crazy things. So, if Daniel had taken the go along to get along approach, if Noah never built the ark, if Abraham never left his homeland, if Moses never confronted Pharaoh, if Joshua didn't follow the crazy plan of marching around Jericho for 7 days and blowing a horn to bring a wall down, if Esther never approached the king, if David never faced Goliath, if Lincoln, Schindler, Bonhoeffer, Churchill, Reagan weren't brave enough to face the evils of their time, where would we be? I don't like to get hate mail, but I've gotten some. My kids haven't had any huge consequences because of it. So I think overall we've been protected, but I thought it was important to share too that the Declaration of Independence says, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are still sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So I guess I just ask you, church, let's not repeat history. Let's not sit on the sideline while society is degrading. Find out where your calling is. Don't let the evil take root. We want to be the light in the world, and we want to expose light, or we want to expose the darkness by being the light.
Just to wrap it up, there was a lot of defeat throughout this whole process, and we don't think it's all losses. When we read Hebrews, these were all commended by their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. Since God has planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. And like we said in the beginning, we were lukewarm. But God had brought us closer together. And I never want to go back to lukewarm. It was such a waste of time. We realized just how much that we needed the church and our own faith, just realizing, going through all this, how true the Bible is. And we have a church that understands the times we live in, and we're happy about that. And our family, like Amy said, did not just survive, we thrived. So God was good to us, just not the ways we were thinking.
Thank you, Dave and Amy. Some of you know my mom. My mom is good friends, co-ministry partners with Amy, so I've asked my mom to kind of do about a 10-minute Q&A. Thank you guys for stepping in to hard areas. And Mom, thank you.
Great job. I'm proud of them. There's not a lot of young families here. I'm hoping that they're watching at home or they will watch it later because it will be taped. this group here, there may be a lot of grandparents here. How can we get them motivated to be involved?
Yeah. Talk with your grandkids, find out what they're learning. And as grandparents, you can look into the school and what your grandchildren are learning just as much as the parents can. So the school, I would say public schools, private schools, all of it. Look into what your children are learning. I mean, Pastor Dave said yesterday, 6% of us have a biblical worldview. So if we want that, we need to look across the spectrum, not just in the public schools, but everywhere. The private schools, online, the books in the library, the video games, the music, everything that your children are interacting with.
Okay, when I first talked with you, and the Lord was opening doors through the restlessness that He caused in you. Mm-hmm. And when you came to my home and said, what if I just don't want to do this? Okay, we've all been there. And when you had said enough, you talked about some deficiencies that you had and some fears you had that will come at every one of us if God calls us into certain places. So tell us about what kind of fears came at you. What deficiencies did you see you had?
Yeah, well, my deficiency was just in my heart, just it being very empty and being that 94% that probably didn't have a completely biblical worldview. So I've had to re-educate myself with that respect. We both did. But also like fears, like, your kids, you worry about your kids. Are they going to lose out on opportunities? Are their grades going to be impacted? What about our jobs? Like, he's an educator, he starts speaking out, like, what about his job? Or, is there going to be pushback from administration there? Fears. Here's an honest fear. Like, here I am pushing back against culture, pushing back against Satan. What's he going to do to me? What's he going to do to my kids?
So did that fear want to paralyze you and keep you from going before the school board or addressing things at work?
Yep, it does. It's hard. So you have to put on your big girl pants and get it done.
Dave, when you saw what was happening to Amy,
Yeah, so there was this one board meeting where she had spoken up, and as she was speaking, I was at home with the kids virtually watching it, and we heard something in the background. And when Amy came home, she said they were talking about calling her a racist, calling her a European, so all sorts of not so nice terms. And so my thought about that is, I'm not married to a dainty little flower. I'm married to someone who, she's kind of a bulldog, so, I wasn't too concerned about it, because I know her.
so you never told her to quit and give up?
No.
Amy, did you ever think about giving up and quitting?
Yeah. So it's been discouraging at times. I thought for sure if we show this, like, people are going to be like, no, stop, we can't have this in our schools. And no, it wasn't. I thought if I started Moms for Liberty and got like this national organization on board and people would, if you build it, they'll come. No, it's all the same people. It's discouraging sometimes. People will come to us and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Can you go to the school board about it? Or can you talk to the superintendent? And it's like, well, yeah, you can't always be the voice. Like, we need other people to speak to, because I've been told multiple times, well, you're the only person that's ever brought this up. So it gets discouraging when that's the case, and you run into this wall because you're the only one that's taking up the issue.
So at one point we had thought, when we look at the board, that final board meeting, and we were really outnumbered, and like, imagine if the Church of Traverse City, not just New Hope, but imagine if they showed up. like how different it could be.
That's a great thought, a great challenge for us. Amy, you've been invited on WTCM by Ron Jolly two times, right? What were you asked?
Well, the first time was in regard to some books in the library. So he had just interviewed a board candidate maybe a couple weeks before I had gone on. And during that interview, Ron had asked the board candidate if he had known of any controversial books within the school, and the board candidate said no. And I had a friend who emailed me and said, hey, you need to email Ron Jolly and let him know what you have encountered. So he told me like what the conversation that had gone on between Ron and the board member. So I emailed Ron and I said, hey Ron, we do have controversial books, and I had emailed the board about this, and that board member that's running for re-election knows about this because he got the email, and I sent him all these images from this book and in the reply I had gotten from TCAPS with regard to the book. So that was the first interview. The second interview was regarding Moms for Liberty and them being labeled a hate group. And we just talked about what the purpose of Moms for Liberty is and how we're not here to be a hate group. We're not here to burn down any walls, but we're here to advocate for kids.
Okay. Well, I thank you for that, but there's just one thing that I want to say to this couple and to us, the older generation. This is what hit me when she read about our Christian roots disappearing, Bible removed from school, prayer removed from school, creation no longer taught. It was very convicting to me because the breakdown came through our generation. In the 50s, when I was born, Planned Parenthood was already in place. We were the rebellious generation. This is where the breakdown came. Breakdown of the home, breakdown of marriages, breakdown of our churches, breakdown of society. This is where prayer was removed. So I was very much convicted by the Spirit, and I want to repent on behalf of our generation that we didn't stand up. In your generation, God is calling forward. So what keeps you going?
I don't know. I mean, that's honest. I don't know. I don't know what keeps me going. So just hope that maybe something may change. Hope that my kids will make it through.
Let me pray for you. Lord, we do thank you for this couple. I thank you for this next generation that you are raising up, Daniels and Esthers. I pray that you will raise up a mighty force out of this generation that will stand for truth, for you, for the love of Christ, for the gospel message, that you will go before them and be their rear guard. Surround them, Lord. I pray, Father, for our young children, and even in this church, in this whole city, and throughout this country, that you would call more, Father, warriors to do your bidding. Lord, we need them. We need you, Lord, to intercede and intervene on our behalf. We thank you for your great mercies that are new every morning, and we give you the praise for what you'll do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dave and Amy. And Amy, last thing, people are wondering, I'm sure, did you get injured at a board meeting? That's
Yeah, nobody took my knee out at a board meeting.
Okay, all right. Nobody Tanya Harding you? Okay,
No,
all right,
no.
that's good. Well, that's good. Well, thank you. Before you leave the stage, I was reading a quote, but Chuck Colson calls it the spiral of silence. And before we just take a brief break, take a look at this. He says, when people fail to speak, the price of speaking rises. As the price to speak rises, still fewer speak out. which further causes the price to rise, so that fewer people yet will speak out until a whole culture or nation is silenced. It's a powerful thought to consider. And what I love about Dave and Amy is that they're willing to step into uncomfortable places to stand for truth and communicate a biblical worldview. But if you heard them, just understand they often feel like they're the only ones at those places. Part of our hope this week is that as we talk about the tension, the struggle, we recognize within homes, within education, within workplace, within politics, it really does take the Church of Jesus Christ living out the biblical worldview and stepping in. So New Hope, be encouraged. There is hope. Take a 10-minute break, and we'll look forward to being back with Andy Blodgett, one of our elders. God bless you guys. Thank you.